Stanford University.
Good evening then, and welcome again to our REVS program, Continuing Studies Co-Production of cars, everything you could ever want to know about them, past, present, and future. Tonight, after a rip-roaring start last week from John Summers, who plunged us into the history of motorsport, tonight we have Joe Hustein, who's one of our own colleagues close at home here at Stanford, a lecturer in product design at Stanford Engineering, but also he has interests all over that reach into law and indeed, as you'll find out tonight, delve deeply into all things automotive. As I said last week, the intention is to make these personal engagements, personal conversations, and explorations of the world of automobilia. And so I'm going to keep short on the introduction to Joe. You're going to find out a great deal about his personal angle on cars from his talk and from the conversation afterwards. The format will be pretty much the same as last week, which is that we'll start with Joe's talk. We'll see how it goes. We can take it quite informally and improvise a little. And there's plenty of opportunity for questions and indeed for conversation afterwards. Right, that's enough from me. Joe, I'm going to hand it straight over to you. Off you go. And the title for tonight, it's about futures and some disconcerting notions.
It's the present. It's actually right now.
It's happening now. That's enough. There you go, Joe. Thank you.
You should start shivering right now. Start worrying. Thank you, Michael, for the introduction. Before I talk, let me say a couple of things. One is, as you're aware, this is being recorded, so I've been asked to sort of stay fairly close to here. And it's kind of weird looking into this light, which means that it's a little harder to see you guys. So if you do have a question, raise your hand, and I don't see you, wave your hand or something. Also, since it's being recorded, if you ask a question, I'm going to repeat it. As Michael says, I'm a lecturer here on campus in the product design group of mechanical engineering. I have a really varied background, and that really explains why I'm going to be talking about what I'm talking about tonight from the angle that I'm talking about. Now, what does that mean? Well, for the last more than 35 years, I've been a lawyer, a corporate lawyer, a technology lawyer. I'm working in technology companies. So I think a lot about the law. Now, as of earlier this year, I finally sort of retired from full-time practice, but I still have my fingers into it. I still do a little consulting. But most of the companies over the last 20, 25 years I've worked at in the semiconductor business make, semiconductors are chips, and a lot of those chips have ended up in cars. And a lot of the things I'm going to be talking about tonight are things that companies that I have worked in have created and have manufactured. So I think a lot about the technology, what it is, who invented it, why it's there. So you've got the law, you've got the technology, but really fundamentally the way I'm going to approach things is a product designer. Because in the product design department, our students there are people who go out and obviously design products. What kind of products? Well, some of them will get into designing cars, but they'll do every kind of product. Electronic products, consumer products, industrial products, toothbrushes, medical things. And anytime you deal with products, there's all kinds of factors. So I'm looking at the car world sort of like a product designer would look at it. Our REVS program, I don't know if some of you may not have been here last week when Michael talked about it a little bit, but the REVS program at Stanford is a fairly new program. This is it started about 1.5 years ago, and the idea is to focus on vehicles and society. In fact, the unofficial acronym or unofficial explanation of REVS is Research in the Evolution of Vehicles and Society. So what does that mean? How do vehicles affect society, and how does society affect vehicles? The entire world of vehicles is very, very large, as I'm about to show you. So I'm going to sort of approach this of, if I were like a super high up guy at Ford or General Motors or one of the big car companies, and I'm trying to think, what's going to be happening 5, 10, 15 years down the road? How are things going to change? That is the perspective. Or I might be a senior person in some government agency. As you'll see, there are lots of government agencies that are involved with cars. So that's what I'm going to be talking about. But let's focus on cars for a second. Let's see. There it goes. This is a page from the current, let's see, what is this one? This is from Car and Driver. No, this is from Motor Trend, the current issue. And the reason that I put it in there is you'll notice that it says up there in the left corner, best driver's car. So the focus is on cars that drivers like. Driving is an experience. It's a very visceral experience. And also you might notice in the lower right-hand corner, we're talking about 9 cars who combined sell for 1.3 million. We're talking about some really hefty cars here. But people are passionate about cars. I would imagine most of you are not like if I did a survey on the street of totally random people, I probably wouldn't get as much enthusiasm about what cars are about as from this group. I think just by signing up to take this course, it means that you have some interest in cars. They're meaningful to you. And cars have been a very, very important part of our lives here in the United States and for that matter around the world. From the very beginning, whoops, let's try this way. From the very beginning, people have been taking cars and they've been modifying them, personalizing them, hopping them up, racing them, exhibiting them. This is a picture from the, 1948 Hot Rod Exposition, National Grand Raceway Expedition Park in Los Angeles. And you'll notice that those are cars, and I know the picture isn't that clear, but those are essentially mostly custom modified cars. A lot of them you can see were maybe done on a Model A, but others use absolutely homemade frames and chassis and everything else. People experimenting because they just like this stuff. They like to do this stuff. But there's many, many aspects to cars. Also, to help you understand why I'm going to be talking about as broad a thing as I'm talking about, the ecosystem of cars is very, very complex. And whoops, there it is. Since almost everybody has a car, it's easy to get too close when you think about cars. And I put this picture up because I like this. It's about an Indian fable, Indian parable, where they take 6 blind men and they put them all around an elephant and say, okay, now touch this elephant and tell me what you're touching. And you'll notice, the guy who's touching the trunk says, I think this is a snake. The one who's touching the tail thinks it's a branch. The one who's touching the ear thinks it's a leaf. The one on the elephant's rump thinks it's a mountain. And what that characterizes is that this elephant is so big that it's hard to get a picture of it. Even if they weren't blind, if they were standing that close, you can imagine they wouldn't see that much. And that's the way most of us are with cars. We're interested in what we buy for ourselves, what we want for our families, what we see in the newspapers. If you're into racing, that's one avenue. If you're into off-roading, it's another avenue. If you're a trucker, it's still yet another avenue. Think of this blue as the car elephant. Think about the fact that designing cars is a lot more than what they look like or how they drive or what people want or physical design or ownership models, travel time, family haulers, trailering, campering, hauling. You'll notice that one of the blue boxes, can you read that? Is that writing big enough for you? You'll notice that one of the boxes is government, safety, and regulation. That's a part of cars today. It's been a part of cars from the very beginning. Ironically, when cars first started driving around the states had different laws, and if you had a car licensed in New York, you couldn't drive it in Pennsylvania. And eventually the law had to step in and allow people to drive across state lines. The law is sort of the evening ground, makes sort of an even playing field. The big box there in the middle, oil, power, fuel, international relations, war, Middle East, getting oil from there. That's a major, major factor connected with cars. The more cars we have, the more oil and gas we use. On the right, you'll see technology, electronics and chips. The chip business, the technology industry that I've been working in for a long, long time, is continuing to pour out ever new chips with new capabilities. Cars now have more chips than any other consumer product by a wide, wide margin. Probably one of the biggest customers, probably the biggest customer for the chip world, are automotive applications. So they go hand in hand. The economics are huge. Then some of these smaller boxes, which are also not any less important, emissions, health, accidents, and injuries, trying to reduce those, that's a factor in car design. What manufacturers want to do. Manufacturers, when they build the cars, they have certain ideas as to what they want to do because they know what they want to sell. They know what they want their customers to buy. So they have, you might say, a stake in all of this too. Then there's the insurance companies, both car insurance and health insurance companies, who are all interested in us having less accidents, less injuries, so that they pay out less. The car insurance industry is a major, major factor in a lot of things dealing with the design of cars, and I'll be talking in specifics later. Then most of the focus here tonight will be on passenger cars, but the roads are shared with vehicles other than passenger cars. There's trucks and buses and other commercial vehicles. There's motorcycles. We all share the same roadways, and so we all have to get along together. And they have their own constituencies, their own picadillos, their own desires as to what they want the roads and the laws to look like. That is something that car designers have to think about. There's racing and sports and driving for fun. Last week, John was talking about racing going way back when. People love racing. Car racing is probably one of the most attended sports on the face of the earth. Every kind of racing, whether it's the historic cars or the collector cars or the Indy cars or the Formula One cars or trucks or mud buggies. There's so many different categories of racing, and that's a very, very large industry. Materials and manufacturing techniques. We had many months ago a guest speaker here in our REVS program, Gordon Murray, who was involved with McLaren, and one of the things he's very famous for is you might say perfecting the use of carbon fiber in Formula One race cars. And what he's doing now is he has a company that is trying to promote the use of carbon fiber in passenger cars. Why? Because it's half the weight of metal and twice its strength. It's also a lot more expensive and a lot longer to manufacture a car, so it's not quite ready for prime time, but you're starting to see a lot of those $1 million supercars being made with carbon fiber. And then there's just the general economics, because all of these industries employ people and use money and finances and banks. And so part of the ecosystem is the financial system. Roughly 1 out of every 5 people in the United States is employed in some way related to cars. 1 out of 5. I don't think there's any other category of anything that can state something like that. Now that's not just people who make cars, but those who sell them, repair them, sell insurance for them, parts, and all work in government agencies, road work, all of that kind of stuff. So it's a major, major thing. And then of course advertising and marketing. Obviously most of the ads that you see during sports events on television are for cars. So it's a big, big deal. So to combine, all these blue boxes are a gigantic blue elephant. And if all you're looking at is just one little part of it, you're not getting the whole picture. But let's go back. Let's go back to the beginning. Why do we have cars? How do we think about cars? Where did they start out? And this is how they started. They started with the horse. Now, why do I say the horse? Remember, before we had horses, for the most part, the only way you could get around was walk. But then they domesticated horses, and you could get on your horse, and you could go wherever you wanted to go, whenever you wanted to go there. And if your horse was big enough, You know, you could haul some stuff. If it wasn't big enough, you'd hitch it to a wagon, or maybe get a couple of horses, or pull a mule behind you. But you had freedom. You had freedom. You had mobility. You had independence and control over your life. That's the paradigm of cars. And when cars came along, that didn't change. The early cars traveled the same roads as the horses and wagons. But for the car, we probably wouldn't have the national parks that we have, because it enabled people to get to those parks. You couldn't take a big family horseback, but you pile your family into a Model T, and you can get, you know, your kids and everything to the national parks. That's the paradigm that we come from. The freedom to travel, to explore, of independence, control over our lives. That's what happened. And in fact, even to this day, we talk about cars that are, you know, automobiles, which mean mobiles that power themselves. We talk about how much horsepower they have, because that came from the paradigm of horses. But the evolution of cars, it is a continuum. We started with the horses and wagons, went to the horseless carriages. Then we had probably 30, 40, 50 years of essentially purely mechanical cars. Then electronics started sort of inching their way into cars, and so we had a period of analog technology. If any of you are into electronics, you'll understand what I mean. It's sort of like some of the ignition systems, some of the distributor systems, lighting systems. That was the analog technology. But now we have digital technology. And over the last 10, 15, 20 years, digital technology, digital chips has changed everything. It's really changed everything. We're going on this continuum from autonomous drivers to autonomous cars. So what chip kind of things are in cars today? And this is a partial list. And I just sat down, started thinking, you know, what are all the chips that you have in there? You know, what is it exactly, you know, how dependent have we become on it? And even if you go back 10 years, a lot of this stuff is older than 10 years. This stuff started sort of filtering in slowly but surely a while back. But if you get a totally up-to-date modern 2012 car, you can get every one of these things in it. Now, a couple of things on the bottom of the list here in the right-hand column are, well, the last one, biometric sniffers. I'll tell you more about those a little bit later. But like Pandora. I mean, who would have guessed that you could get Pandora in a car? And the smartphone interface. There's just so many things that have made cars different than the way they used to be. They're hardly the mechanical devices that we looked at, or that John showed, for example, in his slides last week. So, yes, there's lots and lots and lots of technology. Let me ask you if any of you have had this experience. What exactly does this mean when this light comes on your dashboard? You know, if you listen to the commercials, you have to go to AMCO, and for free, they'll tell you what it means. I mean, the reality is, when you see a check engine light, it could be any of a dozen different things. I mean, it's sort of beyond our control. Yeah?
My mechanic told me when that goes on, it's the idiot light, because it's after the fact.
It's too late.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, John.
I'm a California smog tech. Don't ask me why I am. On the smog tech training course explains that the check engine light will only come on if there is a problem with the emission system. So on a modern car, on an OBD2 car, post-1996 car, the check engine light, or the service engine soon if you've got a BMW or whatever, that light means there is a problem with the emission system. Only a problem with the emission system.
Oh, for the sake of the recording, the answer from the audience is that since, 96, it means there's a problem with the emission system. Okay? Why doesn't the lights say you have a problem with your emission system instead of,
Because if it said you had a problem with the emission system, you wouldn't take it into the dealer to get it fixed. If it says check engine, you think, God, my 40 grand BMW is about to drop a transmission or an engine, I better get it fixed. So it seems to me, call me cynical, that OBD2 is a collusion between the government, car makers, and the dealers to get you to get the car fixed with them rather than try and do it yourself.
are you saying that there's collusion between the dealers to have you come into the dealer when you don't need to? Who would have thought? Yeah. I would have thought that. Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, well, the point is that these cars are becoming ever more complicated. I remember when I first started getting involved with cars, my first degree is in industrial design. Industrial designers do product design. Industrial designers do car design. And I started scribbling cars and sketching cars and playing with real cars when I was a teenager. And back in those days, I could take things apart, put them back together, and I had a few rudimentary parts or tools in my garage, and I could do tune-ups and oil changes. Today, I look under the hood of my car and just forget it. I mean, first of all, you can't see the engine because there's these plastic covers over most things. But even if you take the plastic covers off, there's so many things back and forth. You almost have to be, a Svengali to figure out how it works. I'm glad that there are dealers who can fix them, but it's different today than it used to be. It's not like, maybe that's one of the reasons that there's so many people who like to collect the older cars for the fun of working on them in their garage and changing them and playing with them. If it isn't enough, the government is increasingly dictating what goes into a car. There's a new bill, the Senate Bill 1813, and it does a lot of things. Among other things, now the way the bill is written is it says for all cars being sold after 2015, it mandates brake override technology. That's the technology that says if it sees something in front of you and you don't touch the brakes, it'll stop for you. It'll just work. It has to be there, all new cars. It specifies the pedal placement, where the pedal has to be in front of the driver, and its size and the distance from the floor. It sets other electronic system standards. It establishes push-button ignition standards because, I don't know, I didn't know that we needed those standards, but that's what's in that bill. And it has a prohibition on visual entertainment systems. But as of the last time I looked at the bill, it didn't define exactly what that means. Now, the good news is I just heard today, talking to somebody who follows this stuff, that all of these things, all of these bullet points have been pulled out of the bill. Did I say it requires event data recorders? Yeah, the little black boxes, which we'll talk more about too. They pulled all of that stuff out because there's some stuff that has nothing to do with design, but it's a funding bill, and so they agreed to get it passed to take all this stuff out, but they're going to revisit it next year. But one of these days, this is what you're going to see. The government is saying, we got to put these things in there. And I'll tell you why the government wants to do that. I'm not against the government mandating certain things for cars, but there are side effects that maybe we should take a look at. So what is a dashboard of the future going to look like? The future of dashboards. Now, I'm about to show you a picture of a car that's being displayed right now at the Paris Auto Show. It's a Lexus LFCC. It's a concept car. Now, I don't know if you can tell, but that whole blue thing in the center console is a screen. You've got 3 screens up in the top of the dashboard. You've got 2 screens, one on the right and one on the left of the steering wheel. And you also have one sort of next to the speedometer in the center. Those are all screens operating things. I mean, I'm thinking to myself, how much technology, are you going to pile into one car? And of course, with a lot of attention these days to driver distraction, I mean, God, if I had something like that, maybe I wouldn't have to drive anywhere. I could just, turn it on. It's like a video game, and maybe I'll experience driving without moving or something. But lest you think that oh, this is in the future, it'll never happen. You know, this is not something that we have to worry about today. This is the Cadillac Cue of today that you can buy right now. And you'll notice it's got this, I think it's 11 or 12 inch screen in the center. You know, it's like bigger than an iPod. And the area in front of the steering wheel where you see the speedometer and tachometer, that's also a big screen. And you can change what's in there too. So already today, we've got all kinds of electronic doodads, all kinds of information that we're going to be bombarded with, all manner of things to be distracted by, and for that matter, all manner of things that can break. So what does that mean? The tow trucks of the future are going to have to be a little different too. So, now when we talk about technology, it's not all just the technology that's built into the car. Because the way we drive cars and the way the government looks at the way cars are driven involves other kinds of things. For example, navigation, GPS, geolocation. We've had TomToms, you know, portable things that you can buy at Costco or other stores and carry into your car, so it doesn't even have to be built in. The TomToms and other navigation boxes, they're full two-way electronic boxes getting signals from satellites. You can talk to them, you can query them. And that has nothing to do with what the manufacturer put into your car. There's also obviously smartphones. I imagine most of us these days carry smartphones. Do you have your iPhone 5s yet? You guys wait in line to get, oh, we got one guy. So. But obviously, lots of people carry their phones, their smartphones in their cars. Smartphones, you know, all of this technology I've been talking about, all these ultra miniature chips that we've been making, the reason that we have smartphones is because we've made these things ever more intelligent, ever more capable. And we have full navigation in phones and full communication and live internet. You know, all of this stuff, and you just clip it to your dashboard. So even if it's not built into your car, there are an awful lot of cars out there that have this stuff already in them. Now let's talk about another topic, telematics. Any of you hear the word telematics before? Okay, let's see. There's about 4 or 5 hands. You know, out of what, maybe 40 people. Telematics is a big industry. It's been around for a number of years and it's just exploding. What are telematics? By definition, it's two-way communication, two-way from the car itself, not from the driver, but from the car itself. It includes stuff like navigation, help, crash notification, unlocking, diagnostics. You might say the grandfather of telematics, one of the first products on the market was OnStar. Any of you have OnStar in your cars? Got one person, just one. OnStar is basically a General Motors kind of product, but it's actually, they actually offer it under other names for other manufacturers. But the thing about OnStar is it started before all of these dashboard display units were available, and so it's audio based. So what does that mean? You push a button and you talk to somebody, and you can say, what's the way to ABC, or I'm lost, tell me where I am, or you can call OnStar and they will remotely unlock your car, or if you have an accident, OnStar all by itself, at least according to the commercials, will notify OnStar, and somebody will call you and they'll send help and send police and ambulance and so on. But one thing that's not well known is obviously when you talk to them, they can hear you. You can hear them and they can hear you. There was actually a legal case a few years ago where they arrested some racketeering mobsters by eavesdropping on them through OnStar. Because OnStar can turn on the microphone anytime that it wants and listen into whatever is being said in the car. Now, they say they don't do it without a court order, and that's probably true. I'm not going to disparage them. But the point is they're there. That device is sitting there in your car. And so they have capabilities that they can choose to exercise. Now, little by little, telematics have spread throughout the car. There are sensors all over a car now for all kinds of things. You saw that long list earlier I showed you of all those chips. Well, all those chips all over your car send signals to the dashboard so that that idiot light can come on, or other lights can come on, or other messages. Well, that box, that central box, it can also be connected to transmit that same information to somebody else, whether it's to the dealer, to the government, or whatever. And that's already happening to some extent. Telematics they exist. More recently, it was just announced a couple months ago that the federal government is funding a study in Ann Arbor, Michigan for car-to-car communication. Now this is short range, supposedly like only within a half a mile, and it's not the driver of the car talking to any other driver, it's the car itself talking to other cars in the vicinity. And what it's supposed to do is warn you, oh, there's a hazard ahead, there's a blockage, or somebody is speeding, there's an accident, or the lights burned out, or whatever hazards amount to. They're going to try it with 3,000 cars in the Ann Arbor area over a period of time under a federal government test, because they think that this is the way of the future. And in fact, Ray LaHood said when he rolled this out in Ann Arbor, he said, cars talking to each other is the future of safety. So they're approaching it from safety point of view. If we drive in a more safe way, if the car can help us avoid problems, that is better. So what does that mean? We're going to put a box that'll tell other cars in the vicinity of certain things, whatever that is. Yeah, you have a question?
Yes, related to that. I've also heard that for traffic flow, so like, just people have a different rhythm and flow when they drive, this car-to-car kind of communication with autopilot in conjunction would reduce traffic jams dramatically, because you wouldn't have the issue of yield and people not pull over. So, congestion reduction or traffic flow.
For the recording, the comment was to reduce congestion and to help traffic flow. That's true. It is supposed to aid that. I don't think they know exactly how they're going to do that yet. Ironically, I was mentioning smartphones a few minutes ago. There are smartphone apps you can buy today, and I don't know in all of the places where it actually works, but using your smartphone and just your cell phone coverage, your Wi-Fi coverage, they will broadcast to other people who subscribe to that app in that same vicinity, because it knows where you're at. Your smartphone knows where it's physically at, and knows where everybody else who is on that same system is physically close to you, say within a couple of miles, and it'll actually broadcast and say, don't take this street, take this other street because it's going really slow on this street. And there are apps for doing that already. Vehicle tracking, by the way, is not new. When I say vehicle, I mean, think about airplanes, air traffic control, continuous airplane location. That's been around for many, many decades. Of course, the equipment for airplanes is much bigger, much more expensive. Although, even for airplanes, the cost is coming way, way down. There has also been systems out there for a long time for railroad cars, because they carry perishable and valuable stuff, and people want to know, where's my railroad car full of these expensive things, or all of the fruit that's going to spoil if it doesn't arrive in Dubuque, Iowa by 4 o'clock this afternoon. So they have these tracking devices, and they're satellite-based with GPS. They've also had fleet tracking for trucks and commercial vehicles. That's been around for quite a while also. Again, we're talking about technology that's not entirely new, but it was just bigger, more expensive, not something you would apply to mass cars. For fleet tracking, they would do, for driver and route monitoring. But also in the realm of cars, having tracking of cars is not new either, because we can talk about Formula One racing. Unlike most American racing, Formula One racing, they have all kinds of telemetry. There's sensors all over those Formula One cars constantly transmitting back to the pits. And if you ever have seen the pits in a Formula One race, there's like a whole row of people sitting in front of a whole row of monitors. It's like a space launch. and they're tracking absolutely everything of those cars, live, real time. So that technology exists. And of course, we've also had things like LoJack and other theft recovery systems. One thing that's not widely known is that some of the electric car companies today are enabling their cars with tracking cell phone capability, because if the battery fails, it could be like a $40,000 problem. You can't let the battery completely go dead. And so they warn you about it, they tell you about it, there's lights on the dashboard, but you leave your car at the airport and you're gone for a week or two, and a light coming on the dashboard or an announcement coming in your car, if nobody's there to hear it, you know, it's like the tree, does the tree make noise when it falls in the forest, nobody's there? So what the car companies have done is they know who the driver is, the owner is, and if they detect a real problem, the car will send a signal to the car company, and they'll try to call you or email you and get in touch with you to say, hey, get to your car and plug it in. You have a comment? Or
How about police cars and ambulances? Don't they have something like that already? Sophisticated?
that?
Police cars and ambulances.
Oh yeah, obviously,
Like this.
yeah, government cars have had radios and all kinds of telemetry for a long, long time. But those are very specialized. I was passing by one of the, Stanford is not part of Palo Alto. Stanford is its own city, and we have our own sheriff's department on this campus. I walked by one of their cars as I was walking over here, and the whole center console is nothing but boxes, electronic boxes, and on top of them is a computer, a laptop. And I'm thinking, and there's antennas, there's probably 4 or 5 antennas sticking out of the roof or the back trunk. So heaven only knows how many connections they have and who they can talk to and what they can do. But let's talk about another kind of tracking, toll tag transceivers. Shortly, there's not going to be any bridge toll takers at the Golden Gate Bridge. Why? Because they cost too much money. So they're going to use technology and supposedly make our lives better, and we won't have to slow down. I mean, we won't have to stop. We won't have to pay tolls. Well, does that mean we don't have to pay tolls at all? No, you'll still have to pay tolls. You just won't have to pay them there. If you don't have one of the toll tag transponders, the fast track boxes, then what they'll do is they'll photograph your car and your license plate, and they'll check it through the DMV, and they will send you a courtesy message saying you owe us a toll, and then you can go on the internet or the various stores and pay your toll, which will be higher, by the way, than if you paid the toll through fast track. If you ignore that, you get a ticket.
Those are already in effect in Florida.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, in other parts of the country, that's already been rolled out. So what's new about tracking? Because this is ever expanding, remember I said at the beginning, you can start shivering now and start becoming worried, because what's really new now is automatic collection. No longer do they actually have to focus on individuals. They're just going to track everybody all in various places, various times. They're going to just continuously record things, and they're going to process them in real time, because they have the capability of processing them in real time. And that way, if they see a car that's been stolen, they can click it up right away, and they know a stolen car has just gone through a certain intersection. And they're going to share data. That's already happening. And perhaps even most scary is not just the license plate trackers, but facial recognition, because they're going to be tracking not just cars, but drivers. In order to give a ticket to somebody under the law, like the red light cameras, one of the problems with it is if you can't identify the driver, you can't give them a ticket, because if you don't know who the driver is. So what does that mean? You buy a big shade to cover your face so they can't see? No, that's not what it means. What it means is they have to take a picture of your face, and if they're not entirely sure who you are, they can't give you a ticket. But one of the things, facial recognition software has gotten so sophisticated that they can, in an instant, they don't actually have to have the picture. They can see the relationship, the distance between your eyes and your nose and all that kind of stuff. The same kind of stuff they use in airports, like for terrorism. They'll take pictures of thousands of people walking by, and in microseconds, they can see it, they can identify who they are. And if somebody walking by has been put on a list to be watched, they'll be brought up. And that same thing is happening in traffic control. And by the way, this picture here, this is a current product that's available. And what this product does is it's got a couple of cameras. One faces back toward the driver. It watches you to see how alert you are and if you're the right person, if you're the owner of the car. It does all kinds of things looking at the driver. There's also cameras that point at the front. And they also can see license plates. They also can track lots of other kinds of information. And this is all fed real time via cell phone, all from that one little box. Now, what's next? Autonomous cars. We talk a lot about autonomous cars. It's really sexy to talk about autonomous cars. And you know, frankly, even here at Stanford, that's a big thing for us. We were the winner of the first DARPA challenge for autonomous cars. The CARS program has been heavily involved with that. What you're looking at here is our CARS program. It's an Audi TT whose name is Shelley. It's parked in front of our CARS Revs facility on the other side of campus here. And this is an autonomous car. This car was designed to drive up Pikes Peak at over 100 miles an hour with nobody in it. And it can do it. It's actually been clocked at over 120 at Thunder Hill Race Course with nobody in it. Yeah.
What made you choose a TT, remember?
I think the answer, why is it an Audi TT? The Volkswagen company is one of the sponsors of the research, and they give it to us for free. That's probably the answer.
It is. It looks good to have an Audi TT subject to this kind of research.
Now, separate and apart from that, and I don't want to be speaking out of turn because my colleague Chris Gerdes is the one who's in charge of this, and he's going to be a speaker here in future weeks, and he'll tell you in a great more detail about what this is. But I'm sure one of the factors in selecting this car is it mechanically and electronically allows the interfaces that are required for the autonomous technology. If you couldn't hook those things up to the car, then it wouldn't make a lot of sense to use it this way. But more commonly, when you talk about autonomous cars, is you'll see the picture, it's Governor Brown and Assemblyman Padilla getting out of the Google car. Just last week, this was the day that Jerry Brown signed the bill that made autonomous cars legal on the street, so to speak. Actually, it didn't exactly do that, but what it did do is it instructed the Highway Patrol to come up with criteria for autonomous cars between now and 2015. But, you know, what's an autonomous car in the future going to look like? Here's an autonomous car. I don't know which end is the front and which is the rear, because people are sitting there sort of facing each other. There is no driver. You just get in and you tell it where you want to go. Actually, to me, this sounds to me much more like a horizontal elevator than a car. Now, you know, and think about elevators. And think about elevator technology. One of the companies I used to work for used to make technology for elevators and chips. When you get into an elevator and say you have to go 40 floors, you push the button, it takes off, drops you off at the 40th floor. What's happening there? First of all, they go to extraordinary lengths to program it so you don't feel any acceleration or deceleration. They want to make it comfortable. It's very quiet. Also, with an elevator, think about this. It has a dedicated path. No other elevator is going to get in the same path with that elevator, so you don't have to worry about colliding with anything. It's a different kind of a vehicle. It's a vehicle with a dedicated roadway. Now, why do I say this? These horizontal elevators that you're going to see in the future, these so-called autonomous cars, some of them are going to have dedicated roadways because they're not going to be able to coexist on streets. So I would predict that we're going to see special lanes for some cars in the future in order to facilitate that. But when I think about the elevator that's been carefully programmed so that you don't feel any acceleration, what if they'd called Carroll Shelby when they were designing the elevator and said, Carroll, we want a really hot elevator. We want an experience for people who use our elevator. Can you imagine an elevator going like from 0 to 40 floors in 4 seconds flat, you know, or coming back down and everybody falling on the floor? It sounds funny, but the point is These are decisions that engineers and programmers make. And as we further automate cars, they will make those decisions, how those cars accelerate and decelerate. So it's a complicated puzzle. There are lots of things. There's consumer acceptance, political factors, human-machine interface. It is a puzzle. And this self-driving operation, believe me, the jury is still out as to what it's going to finally look like. It's going to be, I would guess, 10 to 15 years before you see any significant quantity of fully autonomous cars. But that said, we're already in the semi-autonomous phase. Full autonomous cars are getting ever closer, but a lot of the technology is already being rolled out today in ever more intelligent semi-autonomous cars. What we learn today will set the guidelines for tomorrow, including whether we choose to place limits on how cars are changing. So, what's good about car technology? Because I don't want you to walk away from this meeting and say, oh, Joe stood up there and he badmouthed all this technology and how cars are going to be really crappy in the future and we're all going to hate them. That's not what I'm about. I've been a beneficiary of the technology industry for decades. I like technology, but there are issues. There are unintended consequences. But first, let's talk about what's good. So it makes cars better, more reliable, more intelligent. I think that's undeniable. I think cars with this technology, run better. I can't remember the last time my car got out of tune because there's a computer there that's constantly updating it. Technology can make cars safer, since the theory is, and I think the reality is that the more controls there are, the cars, there'll be fewer accidents, fewer injuries. There's better occupant protection. Remember, car design and technology doesn't just mean electronics. It means how are the materials, what materials are selected? How is the car put together? How is it engineered to safeguard its occupants? There's increased efficiency through better power systems and gas mileage. We're managing to continue to get smaller engines and more horsepower every year because of the CAFE standards. Reduced emissions, less oil, gas, maintenance, reduced congestion. Technology offers us the promise, as we talked about earlier, of making congestion. It's not going to eliminate it, but it will manage it a lot better. Some things like ride and car sharing. I don't know if any of you have ever used a zip car, but a zip car is a car that you don't own a car, you need a car. You get a Zip account, then you go get a car for 3 hours, and then you drop it off at a Zip station. It's sort of like you use a car when you need it, and then you take it back. That's car sharing. Bunches of people using the same car. Ride sharing is, like carpooling. Route guidance, obviously, finding the right places, the better roads, and toll systems. Taxing systems. This is the latest technology is going to change the way that we tax, because right now, one of the problems is our cars are getting more efficient, and we pay taxes by buying gasoline. Well, when the car's more efficient, we buy less gasoline. If we buy less gasoline, there's less dollars going to the government. Well, the government needs a certain amount of money, so need to find an alternative to charging you X number of % on buying a gallon of gas. So what have they come up with? A mileage tax. They think that that's fair. So the more miles you drive, the more taxes you will pay. So you'll pay for every mile that you drive. Well, how do they know how many miles you drive? It's not like you're going to drive into the DMV and they're going to look at your odometer. That's not the way it's going to work. It's going to be technology that's embedded in your car that tracks you in real time so they know where you're at, because gas taxes, car taxes are by state. And so they need to know when you're in which state. So they're going to use satellites and geolocation technology to know when you're in California or when you're in Arizona or wherever. And every mile you drive in the applicable state, you'll get a bill for doing that. That's because of technology, chip technology, and telematics, tracking. Also, this enables emergency management if there's disasters or war, because they'll be able to communicate with cars. And when these situations like with Katrina, where you had this nightmare of 100,000 cars all trying to take 2 lanes of highway to get out of New Orleans. Lower insurance premiums for safer driving. Yeah, technology is going to cause driving to be safer, so theoretically you should get lower premiums. I'll believe it when I see it, but that's what they say. Localized commerce. Technology is going to enable us, you know, sort of like with our smartphones. If you're in a certain neighborhood and you need gas, push a button and it'll tell you the nearest gas stations. You want to eat, push a button and your screen will tell you the local eating places. Just like your smartphone will, but it'll be built into the dashboard of your car. And more productivity. This is another factor. Remember I was talking, when we talked about the blue elephant, about one of the factors, the commercial world would like more productivity out of people. If your car can drive itself, even part of the way to the work, does that mean you can sit there and do work before you get to work? So they get another, you know, half hour, hour of your productivity. So there's lots of things about cars and that in some ways that they're going to be enabled. But what's not so good about technology? They know where you are all of the time. Is Big Brother watching us? They includes not just the government, but corporate watchers. For example, Google. Google knows where all of us are. If you use a smartphone with Google Maps in it and you have geolocation enabled, Google knows where you are. If you have an Apple phone, there was a big legal to-do a couple of years ago about they had tracking information of the continuous records of where people were with a certain number of iPhones. They know how you drive your car, how you accelerate and brake. You know, remember, you know, the freedom we talked about earlier? Well, they're going to sort of look over your shoulder, you know, like that the DMV tester that, you know, wants to see whether you're going to pass the test to get your license. They may tell you when you're not driving optimally. They may tell you where and when you can drive because they know where you're at. Driving on certain roads at certain times may require an appointment. We have limited amount of space. We're not going to make highways double the width that they are today. It just ain't going to happen. Population is going to grow. So what are they going to do? They're going to have to find a way to get more cars on the existing amount of roadway we have. Technology is going to enable that. And what that means is probably metering. Parking may also require a reservation. You know, frankly, I was in San Francisco today and I drove quite a while trying to find a place to park. Wish I could have made a reservation somewhere. There's a loss of personal privacy and anonymity about self and about your movements because they are going to know where you are all of the time. And also, the reality of the tech world is records are kept forever. Don't believe it when they say they're only going to keep it a month or 2 years or anything like that. The history is that even if they say that, you can always find it. Anything that goes online is always going to be there somewhere if you keep looking. But the question, a legal question that a lot of legal colleagues of mine have been exploring for a long time is, who owns your data? Do you own it? Do you have a right to exercise control over your movements and where your car is and how you drive or not? That's an unanswered question right now. And believe me, information is going to be shared, sold, traded, and compromised, just like it is with smartphone stuff. They're going to know where you travel, what you like. If you visit certain stores, you know, that's all going to be in the records. And also, your car can be hacked. With all of this technology, believe me, viruses can get into your car. It's already happened. Not, you know, only a couple of times, but it's going to happen. The more pervasive this stuff is, the more widespread it is, the higher the probability. Just earlier this week, there was a big article in the Wall Street Journal about our surveillance economy, talking about, you know, on the brown box on the left, or well, I don't know if it's brown on this screen. On my screen, it's the leftmost box is about cars. The middle box is in your home. The right box is on the move, and down below it talks about all the ways that you're tracked. Now, again, this is not an evil kind of tracking. This is technology trying to help us. It's going to change things. That's why it's different. So you may say, well, if I drive an old car, that doesn't have all of this stuff on it. I'm a collector and I've got this 1956 whatever, and it doesn't have anything electronic, no chips whatsoever. So can you evade it? You can't escape it. Why? Because, well, first of all, if you carry a cell phone, they're going to track you with that. There are road cameras all over the place now, and they're ever increasing. I know in England there's hundreds of thousands of them, on, particularly in the London area. I don't think you can drive a quarter of a block without being seen by many, many cameras. There are road sensors using the toll transceivers. Those things that you use on the bridge, well, there's sensors over the roads, and there's sensors under the roads, and there's sensors besides the roads. So they know when you're going by, and that actually feeds today into traffic information that's used to determine, where the congestion is. But they know where you are. They can track that. Each toll transceiver has got a unique identifier in it, so it knows what car it is. Also, there's license plate readers now patrolling. It's bad enough maybe when government has it, but private parties can now buy these things. And repo men, people who repossess cars, have bought these things, and they drive up and down streets looking for cars, and they actually sell that data. And they can process 180,000 license plate numbers a minute. It's that fast. And again, as we talked about earlier, facial recognition cameras are now emerging. So even if you have an older car, and one other factor. One of the things that we explore a lot here on the Stanford campus, we've got a major computer science department. It's world class. One of the areas that they focus on is so-called big data, which is massive amounts of data that's collected with these machines. Well, what's new? The processing power and the software to analyze it in real time and mine the data. That is what's going to be used to collect and use all of this data that's being collected for all of these purposes. Insurance companies. Insurance companies obviously have a major role. There's a thing, Progressive Insurance actually has a patent on a device that they call the snapshot. What is the snapshot? I don't know if you've seen the ads on television. The snapshot's a little box that you plug into the diagnostic port of your car, any kind of car that's in recent years' car. And what does that do? It tracks where you're going, what you're doing, how you're driving, how you're accelerating, how you're decelerating, what your top speed is. They track all of this stuff, and then they look at it, and then they determine what your insurance rates are. So if if they don't like the way you drive or where you drive, or that you drive at 3 o'clock in the morning, they may say, oh, insurance rates go up. They're going to follow. Now, right now, it's actually voluntary. They're actually advertising and suggesting to people, get this thing, try it on your car, and if we see that you're a really safe driver, we'll give you lower insurance rates. That's what they say. I think this is going to spread because insurance companies make money by not paying out claims. If you don't have an accident, then they don't have to repair your car. If you don't injure anybody, you don't have to pay any medical bills. So it's in their best interest to change your behavior with technology. So this is how they're going to do that. So it's not just big government. Corporations are going to do it to you too. So what does that mean now? It's a quagmire, just a big quagmire. It's like being stuck in the mud. There's numerous government agencies involved. There's over 100 existing government agencies that regulate cars and current technology in cars. Over 100, maybe could be much more than that. I just stopped counting when I got over 100. There are immense legal issues that need to be resolved because the Constitution guarantees our privacy. I know several lawyers who focus on privacy issues, search and seizure and those kinds of things. A lot of the information that's being collected is frankly illegal to be collected. But technology companies aren't stopping to say, oh, is this legal or not? They're just doing it. They're rolling it out. And eventually what will happen is there'll be some lawsuits and it'll go to court and we'll have to talk about it. The law has always lagged behind technology. That's always been true. And I've been doing technology law for 40 years and it's always lagged behind. Patent wars, like the recent lawsuit, Apple versus Samsung on smartphones. Well, if this car technology gets, you know, if somebody gets some really super duper device that they really like, that's going to maybe inch them up against other car companies, somebody else is going to come up with something to try to copy it. And I don't see any reason why we couldn't have patent law wars between car companies like we do between smartphone companies today. There's absolutely no reason to doubt it, because companies do what they need to do to stay ahead. Now, I'm not trying to disparage Apple for suing Samsung. I'm not taking any position in that. But I'm just saying, you know, going to court is not a nice way to, you know, make technology progress and live happily ever after. It's, even though I'm a lawyer and I've earned a lot, you know, my living practicing law, going to court is not the, you know, it's like killing flies with a sledgehammer. It's not the direction you want to go. But it's there, and we got to deal with it, and we got to figure out how to reconcile things with it. And of course, manufacturers are scrambling for future designs, and the related industries face all kinds of uncertainty, the suppliers. So, some final words. Our driving freedom, independence, personal control, unlimited mobility is already fading away. Remember when we go back to the beginning where I showed you the guy on the horse, or, you know, the people in the Model T? It's already fading away. It's going to change things. I'm not saying that that's necessarily entirely bad. The world's going to need this. There are, as I said earlier, there's some positive things about this technology, but there are also some negative things, and we have to reconcile those. For those of us who are driving enthusiasts, those who actually like driving for enjoyment, who like cars, who get a thrill out of certain kinds of cars or certain kinds of places to drive, maybe in the future we're going to be limited to having to go to private tracks because roads are all controlled and you can't drive however you want to drive on the public roads. I think that's a very real prospect at some point in the future. Now, again, I'm talking also about congested urban areas. I mean, obviously, there are going to be places out in the wilderness and very rural areas where these issues won't be anywhere near as pronounced as they are in the cities. But most people in the world live in big cities. So this is a reality for most of the population. It's also important to note that there are certain demographics that think about cars and technology and privacy differently. So they may be less concerned. There's a younger generation that cares a lot less about privacy than the older generation. Guys my age like our privacy and our anonymity, and I don't want the world to know. I have a Facebook page, but I clicked don't make public, you know, all those buttons on your privacy settings. I clicked them all so that nobody sees anything. But I have to have a Facebook page so I can see my grandchildren's pictures, because that's where they get posted, on my son's Facebook page. But I like privacy, I like anonymity. But there's a generation who feels entirely different. They like being public. They like the whole world. They like twittering, you know, when they go to a restaurant, and twittering 10 minutes later when they go to a bar. They like the whole world to know where they are. The paradigm for them on privacy is entirely different. And also, they think differently about cars. There's a generation of people today who don't run out and get their driver's license on the first day they could, like I did, and most of the people in my generation. They may put off for years ever getting a driver's license, but they'll get a smartphone as soon as they can get it. They don't even have to be 16 to get a smartphone, because that's what's important to them in their lives, communication with their friends. So we don't know exactly how this is going to fall out in the future. And also, I want to point out that I've been focusing on the erosion of driving freedom. It's just one of many ways that cars and society and technology are all going to be changing as these things are implemented. Here in the REVS program, I'm hoping over the next couple of years, as we roll out ever more classes, that we study a lot of these aspects and that we focus on a lot more of those blue blocks that I showed you earlier, not just, you know, what I talked about tonight. Because it is a very, very complex and a very, very important part of who we are as a society today. That's it. Questions?
Okay, let's start up again. And given our setup with microphones and such, we will do our best to repeat questions so everybody can hear. what we're talking about in as clear a manner as possible, but also for the recording. I'm going to start with a couple of questions, but really, again, just to emphasize, this is informal, but I've just got something I want to put to Joe, having I've talked with him before about these issues, of course, but then it came across very clearly this evening, Joe, that, okay, it seems to me that you were talking about, on the one hand, technology, and that was very much up front in your story, but actually what you were talking to us about was really something, I wouldn't call it bigger, but really very dear to many people's hearts. In one sense, it was autonomy. And I think and it is sometimes seen by many people as the specter of autonomous driving, raising lots of issues. And I know it's in the news, and everyone else may realize, it is very much in the news at the moment, what the issues are. But I think rightly, you framed these technology issues by, starting out with, a really big story, and I think rightly with a big story about mobility, autonomy, indeed
driver
freedom.
autonomy as opposed to car autonomy.
Yes, driver autonomy, not so much. Now what we're facing is a shift from that driver autonomy to a kind of a system even. Because all of what you're bringing out in terms of surveillance, and you even mentioned it yourself, Big Brother and such. So what we're really talking about here, perhaps, is, technology, but it's really the political economy of mobility. Mm-hmm. It's the politics. And yes, the industry, the corporations involved, hence the economy, the political economy of driving. So I'm kind of saying to you, is that right? Do you think that because that's a big deal.
It is.
Yeah.
But the chip industry, the technology industry is a very big industry. They want to sell ever more chips. And they think they can the cars will be safer, that there'll be less accidents, that there'll be less congestion, and all of these other things, which is going to resonate with a lot of people and a lot of people in government. But it's also going to have other consequences. So one of the things that I was trying to point out is there are more dimensions, more facets to this than simply making cars safer. If they deprive us of our privacy, or if they compromise us in other ways that make us feel uncomfortable, that should be taken into account. It shouldn't just be foisted on us without us having some say in what's going on.
If we look, again, taking up the way you framed this, Joe, if we look at the way cars have been in modern life for well over a century now, they've been so deeply part of culture. And yes, of course, car industry and car technology has been a big deal. But what we're kind of circling around here is to what extent, it's not really the technology that's driving this. Sorry, the metaphors are everywhere too. It's not so much that there's something bigger going on here. And it may be, so what I'm kind of getting around to asking you is, do you think there are some cultural shifts going on here that are actually what your story is focusing on? It's not chips, it's not technology. When you mentioned, that there are, and it was kind of anecdotal, but I think you're right. When you mentioned that maybe younger generations than you are finding issues of privacy and surveillance less importance, that is a cultural difference.
It is.
It's not actually about technology. It's about how you see your life and, yes, your autonomy vis-a-vis these connected systems.
You're absolutely right. Just this morning, I had a long conversation with a friend of mine who's a professor of law at Santa Clara University Law School. She focuses on privacy and constitutional issues. And one of the things she talked about, she pointed out a study that is where 17 to 26-year-olds were more concerned about privacy than 26 to 37-year-olds. They've tried to break these down into different demographics. The youngest generation seems to be coming around more like the oldest generation with a greater concern for privacy. They're actually reading the click wrap agreements that when you download an app on your phone, or there's this long thing and it says, click here to agree. 99% of the people, and I have to confess, I write some of those things or have in the past. 99% of the people in the world never read them. They just click agree. Because even if they read them, they probably wouldn't understand most of what's there. But remember, the companies that I used to represent and work for, we're trying to eliminate liability and exposure. And so we're disclosing all kinds of stuff. And we want the user to say, I agree to do this. Well, this youngest generation are starting to read some of that stuff and say, wait a second, I don't want this app to know my location all the time or to be able to sell it to other people. And they're, in some cases, refusing the apps. I was surprised when I heard that statistic. So you can't say that we're a totally homogeneous group by age or any other category culturally.
Is there something else here perhaps as well? And that is, again, you flagged up issues precisely of mobility and how they relate to our sense of being able to, it's freedom, yes, but a lot more, as you say. But maybe there's an element of mobility attitudes or how we understand mobility itself changing. Because, if you're interconnected through your technology, your devices, that is a kind of, freedom to be in many places at one time.
That's true.
It's a different kind of attitude towards your ability not just to be here, but to connect somewhere else. And maybe that's what we're seeing too, a shift which is less from jump in the car and go places, but rather you can connect globally, instantly, with a small device in the palm of your hand. And so mobility itself is shifting in terms of its system status, in terms of the infrastructures and all the technology that enables it.
Technology enables me to have the freedom to work from home in my pajamas and not to have to travel.
Yeah, so I think delving into these issues is very, well,
As
very pertinent.
as long as the internet stays up, it works.
Well, it's the infrastructural thing here.
That's right.
I mean, if you can't buy, fuel, gasoline for the car because the supply chains have broken down, you can't drive. And we know how, that can happen and affect people in all sorts of different ways. Now, there's more to go wrong. Absolutely, maybe the system is less robust, but we're prepared in many ways to take that cost. Yeah. Something else that you picked up on, and then we can throw it open, I think, and perhaps this one might appeal, which is the experience of driving.
Yes.
And how the monitoring, all the things you are sharing with us, telemetry, telematics, and surveillance and being watched is, as you rightly point out, well, it has already started changing the driving experience. What about then that driving experience? There is, I think, potentially a scenario, is there not, where technologies can be a means of retaining, or can they be a means of retaining that experience through simulation? Okay, we know we have research projects that have gone on at Stanford looking, for example, at electric cars and noise feedback. So electric cars sound differently, and they don't have the attractive tones of some engines and transmission systems and exhaust systems and the rest. So
they're not Ferraris, no.
There you go. So you can have a simulated Ferrari sound environment, a soundscape fed back into your car interior.
Absolutely.
Do you think that this may be a way, that we will see car experience evolving?
Well, the technology of cars, if you're talking about the sound of cars, there's already systems there to try to, inside the car, eliminate noise, because there's some people that don't want noise. There are others that will love noise. In fact, John may talk about for the classic cars where the manufacturers would absolutely forbid putting a radio in, because why would you put a radio in? That's going to take away from listening to the joyful sounds of the engine and the sounds of the tires and all of that. That's part of the driving experience. It's visceral, it's multisensory. But there are other people that don't want to hear any of that stuff. They want it to be entirely different. So if you can control it, that means you can simulate it.
And it also, you can have options, choices.
And I suppose you could put a really big sound system in a little Fiat and make it sound like a Ferrari if you wanted to the rest of the world. Either inside the car or outside the car,
And it doesn't have to be perhaps just sound. You know, there's all sorts of other things you could maybe do, but I don't know. I don't know. This will crop up again as to, you know, simulating, well, not just simulating, but the whole experience of driving. And yes, simulating old driving experiences, but also how, you know, contemporary and future driving experience can be modified, let's put it that way.
Think about, as a product designer for a manufacturer, you're selling a car, and you can't make 1,000 different varieties of cars. You have to, you're limited as to how many varieties of cars you have. And you've got to sell it to as wide an audience as you can, because the way you make money is selling volume. Well, the people who buy that car, some of them are going to like the sound, some of them are not going to like the sound. Some of them like a more vigorous, visceral kind of experience in driving. Others want to be isolated. So technology may enable future cars to dial in how you want it to be. Do you want it to be sporty, not so sporty? You want it to be, you want more sounds from the outside? You know, whatever you want to do, technology will enable it. And I think that's going to be one of the ways that cars, the manufacturers will try to address multiple audiences.
Do you think, yes, let's open it up. Go on, please, yes.
I think that's prostituting the soul of a car.
So the comment is, further just to share, yeah, the comment is that this is prostituting the soul of a car. That is the simulation or the marketing?
Simulation, all this
Yeah.
added crap
Faking.
to me is prostituting what that car's soul is.
Yes.
Well, I was going to say, the fact that there's even dials and gauges is sort of flattering the driver that they have, they're monitoring the systems, right? You don't, I have a car with an automatic transmission, it has a tachometer, I don't need that. Why is it there, right? And even, I need a speedometer and a gas gauge, and why is there wood on dashboards? I mean, that's just some emphasis to of the past, right? That somehow makes us feel that there's some connection to older cars. Really, you know, why is it there? It's ridiculous if you think about it.
So are we then delving into, you mentioned the soul of a car, and I think that's very, very interesting. Is the issue then authenticity? Because we're getting into issues here of fakery, of do you really need this? Is it superfluous to the genuine relationship between the driver and the vehicle and the soul of the vehicle, which kind of almost comes alive in this relationship? So is it then that we're losing authenticity? That's the kind of question.
We are at a transition point from losing the Wild West. I loved your picture, the metaphor, because we're transitioning away from that.
We're transitioning away from the Wild West. From the early...
The soul is changing.
Well, again, that's the paradigm. If you've been around cars for a number of years, that's the paradigm you know. But one person that I spoke to, I should mention, a lot of the stuff I was talking about, until the beginning of this year, I was working full time in another job. Then I decided to focus my energy on this stuff. So I've started researching this stuff, but I'm still at the very early stages. I've been talking to lots of people, and there are lots of things that I brought up that could be further explored. This is not just a situation of an onion with lots of layers. This is a situation with a whole bushel full of onions. The world is changing, and young people. One of the people I spoke to today said they don't drive cars; they use cars. Think about that. You know, they need to go somewhere, so they use a car to get there. They don't care what kind of car it is. Their goal is to get from point A to point B. Others of us, I would imagine a lot of the people in this room, enjoy cars and have some enthusiast appreciation for cars. And think about that. Think about, what does it feel like? How does it drive? Am I enjoying this? Am I going to have a good experience because I'm going to drive this car when I drive from here to Los Angeles instead of that, minivan that, that usually is they take the soccer team in. So.
Youngsters who also care. I have a friend, he's what, 22? He still has a 240Z. He rebuilds it and makes it work. So.
The older cars. Yeah, some people, they focus on the older cars because, frankly, the mechanical cars gave more visceral feedback. And people who like that and enjoy that that's terrific for them.
Can a question that if I can just raise this because there's issues here of loss of the past, of authenticity, the genuine experience, and I'm feeling a little bit kind of nostalgia's coming in here, and the notion that a mechanical device, in this case an older mechanical device, can have more soul than other kinds of devices, more chip-laden, that we're seeing today. Just as a quick question before we move on, maybe we'll explore this one. Can a chipped device have soul? In the way that we see a 50s Thunderbird having soul. Will it ever? Will it ever? Anyway, yes.
Well, before you said that comment, I was going to say there's a whole segment of car enthusiasts, tuners, and
yes.
If I can take my Mini and have the chip essentially modded on it so I can get more horsepower out of my Mini. There's a whole community of people that do that, and that's taking the technology piece of it. And I imagine, whether it's an in-dash system, I mean, there's that whole hacker mentality that can actually customize your car.
And we have seen, the growth just in the last few years of, maker communities who are into modifying technology that we would typically not see as particularly soulful. Right. So yeah, maybe we can imagine times when that soul comes along. Yeah.
I think that's an opportunity for a manufacturer. I mean, the automotive industry, is becoming more of a utility, more of a service. That's money for the dealers. But if somebody were to really open up the car and allow you to do that, I mean, it could be a boon for the enthusiasts.
I used to have a BMW, and I was constantly getting advertisements from companies wanting to sell me modified chips to replace the factory stock chips that would up my performance this way or that way and do various things.
Well, Joe, his big brother, being the California Air Resources Board, is going to put a kibosh on all of this, old cars as well as cheap cars. From their point of view, they have a specific point of view. They don't want emissions, or less emissions with more cars. I think we went through that with 25-year-old cars were going to be exempt from it, and now every once in a while it crops up again. Once you chip a car, the warranty is now no longer in effect. And so what is that? Ramifications of that? And can you protect it in the dealership or not? A lot of questions.
Yeah, there are a lot of questions to modify your car. And obviously, if you've got a car still under warranty, there is a legitimate question. Do you want to jeopardize that warranty by modifying it?
Again, though, one of the stories or issues behind this is, your ability to modify, or the ability to modify, to change things, vis-a-vis regulating agencies who may not like what you're particularly doing with that. And again, that's this big story of corporate interest, government interest.
You don't own that. So it isn't a soul because some agency won't let you touch it.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I said earlier, there's over 100 government agencies that regulate automobiles. There could be 200. I don't know how many there are. There are just so many of them. And they don't coordinate with each other. In fact, oftentimes they collide with each other, which is a nightmare for manufacturers.
Let's keep going. Yes, it's from.
I just want to present the idea that, in fact, just the opposite is happening, and that cars have more soul than ever.
The cars have more soul than ever.
In the, let's say, the late 50s, you had a choice of 1 or 2 models from Chevrolet, 1 or 2 models from Ford. Now you have a choice of 15 or 20 models, and out of each of those 15 or 20 models, you have unending combinations of colors, materials, textures, engines, drivetrains, features. They're more personalized than ever, to the point where you can buy a new Ford and you decide on the display that you're going to have in your car.
That's true. There's lots of personalization options.
Or the one that is taken care of with its own room. It's got space for 2 of them in there, if you like. And manufacturers are attempting to build in more soul and more emotion and more love than ever before.
Oh, I've talked to several manufacturers.
Older nostalgic concepts of these things of what we remember about old cars. In fact, I have a very old car too, and I love to work on it, and I completely rebuilt it actually, but I appreciate how far and how good manufacturers have come.
Oh,
So-
I don't think manufacturers have ill intentions. They want to sell as many cars as they can. They want to satisfy their customers. They're very genuine about that. But it's just that there are limitations to the number of permutations and combinations that they can offer. And then they're inundated with all the regulations and with all these other criteria that they have to satisfy. So it's a conundrum for people in the industry.
I like this though, this raising of the question of, how do we establish a personal relationship with the vehicle? Because what you've been talking about, Joe, is how that is being interrupted. There are issues of behavior modification, behavior change that you're bringing up. But the notion that customization and making an ability or opportunities to make something your own is what really is at the heart of all of this. And that cuts across old and new. That's what you're saying. And I think that's very, very interesting. I don't want to kind of make it too pompous, but what I hear in a lot of this, and I'll put my anthropologist come sociologist hat on, there's an issue here of, establishing a relationship with something that we've made or having a relationship with. And it's about alienation. To what extent we feel a relationship, a genuine relationship with an artifact such as a vehicle, and to what extent that relationship is interrupted and spoiled by these other factors that we've been talking about. But ultimately, it's this relationship of alienation or non-alienation with an artifact. Fascinating.
Just one second, we're going to come. The relationship we have with cars is different than almost anything else inanimate. Think, going back to the horses. In the olden days, if you had a horse and somebody stole it, you could kill them or hang them. It was that important to your life. Nobody questioned a horse thief did not have a right to continue their existence on Earth. That's at least in the Westerns I saw. Think about cars. Think about the things in your life that are inanimate. If you wake up one morning and go out to your car and it's dead as a doornail and won't start, what is your reaction? I would guess for most people that is the most negative reaction you could have for any inanimate object in your life, because you're so important, so vital to your day-to-day life.
And computers. If your computer isn't working, you feel like you lost it all.
And of course, the computers are sort of melding with the cars now. So, yes, back there.
Yeah. I was going to say that I'm probably of your generation, possibly older, and I've had a lot of cars. And there were two things that have happened over the years. Is that cars used to have problems, and they would have their own little quirks. And people developed an affection. It's like something wasn't perfect. It was like, oh, isn't this a wonderful, even if it was a pain, you spoke of it affectionately when things happened. The vacation that was the most interesting is the one where everything failed. It's not the one where everything ran smoothly, right? And I think that that's something that's being lost frequently, especially maybe among younger people, is because everything runs smoothly. It's like, well, of course. It's like you don't, there aren't things you have to fix. Plus, if they go wrong, you can't fix them. Unless, you can plug in a chip yourself or something. And then the other thing is I have been aware for many years that the car actually functions like the human body. There are very many analogies and things, and you'll think of something in your body and you'll think, oh, you'll hear your car isn't working this way, and you'll think, oh, well, that's just like my blah, blah, blah system. And that there's so many systems that way, and I think that people are not chips yet. So therefore, it will be very hard for people to, is there a word, anagalize or whatever, their body and their car functioning in the same way in the future.
So chipped cars are too cyborg-like, and
Right, that's exactly right.
I was just saying the other day.
There's a humanness to an old car system that you can actually imagine how it were told the carburetor does this, and oh yeah, you put gas in the tank, well, it's like eating.
I was just saying the other day when I got in my car on a cold morning and it was a little bit hesitant, I wonder if it's getting arthritis.
Yes, down the front, you were next. Yeah.
I just want to posit that I don't think things have really changed. The idea of authenticity is a bit of an illusion, I think, to people. I think tuning cars, exhaust systems have always been about how they sound. And when I was in high school, the cars that were all show and no go were very common. Horsepower costs money, right? So I think that's always been a human and an emotional experience, and that's really related to how they sound and how they look and all that. So I don't think that's really changed. It is harder to change your exhaust system because of smog and stuff like that. So that aspect has changed. But I think it's really to think of it that fundamentally there's some soul to a car that's changed now, that it's not soulful, or that if it sounds, or if Nissan tunes their GTR a certain way so it sounds cool, or a Mustang GT sounds very powerful. I think that nothing has really changed there. I think it's an aesthetic.
It's an aesthetic.
Yeah.
So our relationship has all these aesthetic components, yes.
They sell sound. Think about Harley-Davidson motorcycles.
Yeah.
There's a certain putt-putt that they intentionally engineer into the car, and into the motorcycle, to make that sound.
CEO of Harley Davidson and the boss in the Valley who sat next to him on a plane, and the guy said to him, look, we don't sell motorcycles, we sell the ability for anyone to be a badass.
I think it's not at all coincidental that our conversation is circling around issues here of authenticity, the experience economy. What are you selling? We're not selling motorbikes. We're selling the hope, the prospect, the ability to be a badass. Yeah.
Well,
But I mean, Harley, they're selling a social currency, and your end block there is the marketing of cars, and like some people buy them to drive, and some people buy them to belong to a community.
we had the chairman of Ferrari here at the business school a couple months ago, and he gave a wonderful talk, and he was very clear, didn't pull any punches. He said, we're not selling cars, we're selling a dream. That's what he said. People, have this emotional dream about what they think a car ought to be, and Ferraris fulfill that dream. And that's what they do.
Yes.
You asked this question if adding more chips takes away some of the soul, and I don't think that's true, because there's some historical evidence. Something similar happened to the airplane industry when they brought in the auto land feature in the 60s, 70s, and planes have become more and more sophisticated. But even today, a lot of pilots prefer to land the plane themselves, because that's why they became pilots, because that's one of the most important elements of being a pilot, the ability to take off and land. But they are forced to switch over to the auto land system by regulations when there's bad weather or something extraordinary. All this change. We're talking of this or that. I hope there is some sort of a blend in the future where we get to drive when we want, but instead of if we break a law and the cops pull us over, instead of giving us a $500 ticket, they put us on autopilot for a week. It's like a soccer player being thrown out for a red card or something of that sort. I hope there's a blend and it doesn't completely disappear.
I like that vision. You're on autopilot for a week. Yeah. Yes.
I had a question about the autonomous vehicles. For my commute, I have no problem sitting in a little pod that knows where it goes and everything. And I'm curious about the transitional years when they maybe become more autonomous, and how highways are going to blend the two, and someday will autonomous drivers be illegal, sort of like people slowly resisted. They resisted and then accepted seatbelts, and now we don't think about it. Someday in the future, people might be like, you can't drive your own car.
Well, here's what I envision, having talked to a bunch of people. I think ultimately the fully autonomous cars, they're going to just merge into highways all by themselves, be shuttled into train-like, long trains, snaking around at very high speeds. The car is only a couple of feet apart from each other. But that's, I think, a longer way off. In the shorter realm, I think the mostly autonomous or semi-autonomous, at some point they'll reach a stage of sophistication where they will have segregated lanes. You'll be able to go into an autonomous lane if you're equipped that way, and there'll be roadway sensors to help interact with you. And it'll actually, I think, will allow you to drive faster. The people who have the mechanical older cars that are not autonomous, my guess is they'll be shunted off to the slower lanes at slower speeds to try to discourage them and to try to cut down on accidents. The theory being that under computer control in the fast lane, safety is being preserved. So that's how I would envision sort of in the interim, because we're not going to build new freeways. And we're not going to widen the freeways. There's only so much space and it's too expensive. So we have to find a way to use the resources and roads we have today. And inevitably that means technology is going to take over control.
Well,
Back again.
I was thinking about this because you mentioned last week that you were going to be speaking on that. And I'm wondering why they don't basically have private companies building toll roads that will actually do this, so that you have the people who will actually be in these horizontal elevators being driven to the appropriate spot, and they'll be paid for by the people who are using them, and actually the people who are in their little old cars like me driving around will be like the people on the old roads in France that everybody else is on the péage, but I'm on, the N4 or something.
I think that's a valid observation. It wouldn't surprise me if somebody came along. They'd have to pencil it out and see if it made financial sense. But if money could be made, I mean, there are private toll roads already. I know in Southern California they built one sort of, I think in Orange County. I've not seen it or been there, but it's privately owned and it sort of runs parallel to the public highways. And I don't see.
But it's expensive. It's 73, I think, on the way to San Diego.
Yeah.
And somebody in a Veyron got a ticket like 180 on that. That might be the highest ticket ever or something like that.
Bugatti Veyron, yes. Yeah.
I had an interesting social one on that, of thinking back with my kid here about when you can get rid of car insurance companies once the autonomous vehicles are driving them, and you're not going to have an accident. And could you fund it entirely from the cost of car insurance?
Well, my response to that, because, I have to give a disclaimer. The first 7 years I practiced law at a law school, I did work for insurance companies. I was a tort insurance defense lawyer. Accidents happen. And I don't care what technology is out there, time to time it's going to break, it's going to fail, there will be accidents. So I don't see it going away. And also keep something else in mind, because I didn't emphasize it in my talk, but these roadways, these public roadways, we share these with very big trucks, commercial vehicles, buses. If they collide, if they say, oh, we're much safer now, it's autonomous, so we can cut the amount of metal in half to make the car lighter, so we can put a smaller engine and less emission, and it's safer and all that kind of stuff. Sure, you have half the size of the car, maybe you can go at the full speed, but if you collide with a truck, you're a goner, because the laws of physics are not going to change, and they're not going to make the trucks appreciably smaller because they still have to haul all those goods. In fact, if anything, I would imagine in the future the trucks would be bigger. But we share those roads and we have to cooperate.
If you're talking about colliding with trucks, I mean, I hear people say, why would you want to be in a smart car? What would happen if you hit a truck with it? It doesn't matter if you're in a Cadillac or a smart car. If you're hitting a semi, the semi wins, period.
Laws of physics. Yeah.
Just the last two now. We've got one here and yes.
So that point said, for the insurance question, I don't need to buy insurance if I take a train. I don't need to do it if I'm riding on an airplane. If I'm not operating the vehicle, why is there still a requirement? Like, it almost begs the question of, like, why are we even doing this to cars? These are effectively becoming trains that just happen to run on motorways.
I think that's a very pertinent point, because it's getting to the heart of quite how we see the car as a vehicle. And they're becoming systems which are integrated much more widely.
Well,
than
there will be insurance, but the legitimate question is, does the person who occupies the vehicle and not driving it, is that the person who has to pay the premium? It may be the owner of the vehicle.
I think there's already people that pay for flight insurance.
Yeah.
The differentiating factor is who owns the vehicle.
Yeah, it's down to all these issues in insurance. I think are absolutely just indicating how embedded all these issues are and how wonderfully, complicated they are. But we have to respect time and let's. You had
My
yes.
comment was going to be, will they have autonomous truck lanes? in the future, you know.
Autonomous truck lanes? I don't know if there'll be,
So we won't have such big bash-ups with the trucks and so on, put them on automatic.
Volvo is already running trucks in Sweden on an experimental basis where they put trucks just a few feet apart at highway speeds. And essentially the way those work is the lead truck is driven by a professional driver, and the technology in that truck feeds information to the trucks behind it so that the drivers let go of the steering wheel on the trucks behind. And they've actually experimented with having half a dozen trucks going along at 80 miles an hour.
Trains.
Trains of trucks, right.
Okay, well, with that, we'll finish for this evening, but I am going to, if you want to stay for a little bit longer, I'm going to just go through the website again. People have started putting comments up and photos up and all sorts. It's coming on really nicely. But some of you have asked how you get access to it, and I'll very simply put the address up and password again for those who need to know. But otherwise, thank you again for your participation, and thank you.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.